listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
We've been discussing this story at the top of each segment. It's a very important story. Pentagon leak suspect Jack Teixeira charged in federal court. The 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman has been accused of leaking documents the Department of Defense says contain sensitive and highly classified material. He was charged today with unauthorized retention and transmission of national defense information and willful retention of classified documents. What are we to take from all of this? Well, for insight, let's turn to our next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston, one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest book is entitled The Counter-Revolution of 1836, Texas Slavery, Jim Crow, and the Roots of American Fascism. Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, sir, welcome back.
Thank you for inviting me.
As we have been discussing this story since it broke, I put it in the context of Julian Assange, and particularly as we have the New York Times and the Washington Post, they have been reporting on the leaked documents the same way they reported on the leaked documents from Julian Assange. And I'm just wondering, is this a fair comparison? And if it is, then it seems to be hypocritical as it relates to their reporting on this. Your thoughts on all of, and also to say that the story doesn't make any sense. Dr. Gerald Horne.
What do you mean it doesn't make any sense?
The way that the story is unfolding, that just this 21-year-old National Guardsman has access to the documents that appear to have come from the level in which they have come.
Oh, I see. Well, I think what that bespeaks is the overclassification that takes place in the U.S. government bureaucracy. Recall that the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was certainly not a man of the left, complained about this incessantly. It's well known that there's overclassification because the cliche is that if you read carefully the daily press and listen to the Critical Hour, you'll know as much about what's going on in Ukraine as many in the State Department and in the Pentagon. Certainly, there are far too many intelligence agencies in the United States. Sometimes you get the idea that one U.S. intelligence agency is just spying on another. That's the import, in fact, of this recent Substack by Seymour Hersh, where you have intelligence agencies complaining about the State Department. And of course, the State Department has its own intelligence wing. That's why one of the so-called reforms of post 9/11, post September 11, 2001, was to create a DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, not to be confused with Mr. Burns, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, not to be confused with Defense Intelligence. And so I think that one reform going forward, although don't hold your breath for it to take place, would be to eliminate some of these intelligence agencies. They have far too much time on their hands. That's why they spy on the cell phone of the former Chancellor Angela Merkel. That's why they create eruptions with so-called allies such as South Korea, which is part of the current controversy that's unfolding as we speak. And certainly that money, those billions that are being spent on intelligence, could be better spent on education, for example, of college students, on food stamps, and all the rest. But that tends to make too much sense, which probably suggests that it won't take place. But I think that what will probably unfold is a severe punishment of Mr. Teixeira, the 21-year-old man who's now in the dock and being accused, because some of the material that's emerging is quite embarrassing, not least to the escapade in Ukraine as administered by the Pentagon and the State Department. The documents suggest that Lloyd Austin, the man from Raytheon, the chief of the Pentagon, has been economical with the truth, as they say, euphemistically, when he testified under oath before Congress. The same could be said for Mr. Kirby, the national security spokesman, and Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, and the other persons who are sitting in that clown car known as Washington, D.C.
Something we haven't actually talked about in a while, and I wanted to get your thoughts, and that is Haiti arms importation scandal. Former Minister Berto Dorsey is in the hot seat, and and I have to suspect anytime I see arms being transported into Haiti, I suspect CIA involvement, or Canada or Five Eyes or something. Your thoughts on this story about some kind of a scandal going on in Haiti involving the importation of arms?
Well, it's no secret that Haiti is going through difficult times right now. It's a direct result of the Haitian people having the gumption to overthrow slavery in the early 19th century, which created a general crisis in the entire slave system that could only be resolved with this collapse. If you look at your map, you'll see that Haiti shares a small island with the Dominican Republic. Some of you might have scratched your heads and say, why do two small nations share a small island? Well, a lot of it has to do with U.S. interference in the internal affairs of that island, leading in the mid-19th century to the United States helping to balkanize that island, thereby weakening Haiti. The United States occupied Haiti in the early decades of the 20th century. Recall what happened to Mr. Aristide, a duly elected leader of Haiti, who was shepherded away from the island at the behest of U.S. imperialism, and the men who are accused of assassinating in his bed the most recent leader of Haiti. Of course, many of them had close South Florida ties. And this latest story also connects to the previous story because apparently as part of the document dump that we are now discussing involving Mr. Teixeira, apparently there are references in that document dump to some forces in Haiti seeking the assistance and good offices of the Wagner Group, which, as you know, is involved with Moscow in the campaign in Ukraine, is involved in various parts of Africa as well. And if the Wagner Group arrives at the virtual doorstep of U.S. imperialism, you better believe that U.S. imperialism will be working overtime to ship arms to its allies to make sure that the Wagner Group does not succeed, assuming that it somehow arrives.
Let me read just the first paragraph from this story. The arms importation scandal by priests or laity within the Episcopal Church of Haiti pales in comparison to the scale of another illegal arms importation trafficking scandal to which officials of Prime Minister Ariel Henry's de facto government were heavily involved. Now, one of the dominant narratives coming out of Haiti that is controlled by the United States is there are all these armed gangs roaming the island, wreaking havoc, and democracy cannot be established because you've got Mr. Teixeira, Mr. Barbecue, and this whole thing. Well, that to me sounds eerily reminiscent of the Gary Webb story from the San Jose Mercury News a number of years ago about the United States leaving open boxcars full of weapons in Los Angeles so that the gangs in LA would wind up be heavily armed and do what they do. So point being, we've seen this narrative before. And what does that say to you? Well, am I right? Am I right to connect those dots?
Well, of course, you are onto something. And what it says to me, at least, is that as ever, Washington is barking up the wrong tree. It seems to me that if there are those who are seriously concerned about the destiny and fate of Haiti, as you suggested with regard to previous stories, it makes sense to pursue the simplest remedy. The simplest remedy would be to involve the neighbors, Cuba and Jamaica, the closest neighbors, in the first place, more deeply in helping to mediate and resolve the disputes that are now raging in Haiti. We know that there are Cuban medics in Haiti who are doing a bang-up job. We know also that Jamaica maintains one of its most significant legations in Haiti as well. But instead, you get these stories about whether the Canadians will be enticed to intervene, whether Washington should somehow put boots on the ground. And those two options are the last thing that Haiti needs, and somehow they're perpetually discussed.
Common Dreams, Schumer and Warnock, the call for DOJ to probe expulsion of Tennessee Democrats. Senate Democrats sent a letter urging the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate the recent expulsion of 2 Tennessee Democratic lawmakers. And, you know, I brought up the fact that it seems to me that there are some constitutional questions there. But the other part of it is this. I look at it and I think, man, the House will be investigating somebody in New York, and the Senate would be investigating Tennessee, and it just seems like weird things are going on. I don't know. Dr. Horne, make some sense of all of this.
Well, with regard to Tennessee, I think that is a situation well worthy of external scrutiny, because it's apparent that the Republicans who control the legislature in Nashville and who unceremoniously booted out Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, the 2 black legislators from Nashville and Memphis, because of their avid protests about the lethargy in pursuing gun control. It's apparent that the Tennessee Republican majority acted with ill intention. Why did they not boot out the Euro-American woman, for example, who joined the 2 Justins? And I think that the slogan, "No Justins, no peace," needs to be repeated. And certainly, if you look at constitutional law, what quickly comes to mind are 2 cases involving 2 previous expulsions of legislators. I'm thinking of the expulsion of the late Julian Bond from his seat in the Georgia state legislature some decades ago because of his opposition to the Vietnam War. Eventually, that expulsion was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm thinking of the expulsion of Harlem Congressman, or the attempted expulsion of Harlem Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, the late Adam Clayton Powell. He, too, was returned to his seat. And so there is a constitutional hook with regard to this initiative by Senator Warnock in Georgia. Now, with regard to Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio, one of the GOP wildmen who is seeking to subpoena Alvin Bragg, the district attorney who now has indicted Mr. Trump, one looks with frustration for a constitutional hook. Because you know that out of one side of their mouth, the Republicans and conservatives are always talking about a small government and keeping government closer to the people, and talking about the Bigfoot coming out of Washington. But the Bigfoot is coming out of Washington in the form of Jim Jordan and his comrades who are trying to investigate Mr. Bragg. And actually what they're trying to do, which is rather transparent, they're trying to find out what evidence Mr. Bragg has on Mr. Trump as they go through his files, and then somehow leak it either directly to the Trump defense team or to the press where the Trump defense team can read about it. So certainly I think that the Nashville situation can be distinguished from the Manhattan situation. And I take my hat off to Senator Warnock for pursuing that.
Consortium News has a really interesting piece, From Forever to Eternal War. More war and nothing else, the argument goes, will bring peace. And speak to this because I had said earlier, my son is 21 years old. He's never known peace in his lifetime. And the United States lost in Vietnam. The United States lost in Iraq. We lost in Libya. We lost in Afghanistan. We're losing in Ukraine. And now we're trying to pick a fight with China. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have their eyes set on the global South. So, Dr. Horne, your thoughts?
Well, with regard to the latter, that is quite appropriate to mention in light of the fact that the President Lula da Silva is causing waves in Washington, because right now, as we speak, he's breaking bread with President Xi in Beijing. It's no secret that these two leaders are members of the alternative to the U.S.-led G7, Group of Seven, that includes the Western European nations, Canada, and Japan. I'm speaking of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And of course, the BRICS are trying to develop an alternative currency to sideline the dollar. Already, China is the leading trade partner of Brazil. Brazil has refused to send weapons to Ukraine, to the consternation of Washington. So it's no secret as well that many in the Republican Party did not envision a Lula victory in the elections that took place a few months ago in Brazil. They much preferred the then incumbent, Mr. Bolsonaro, the Trump of the tropics, who was ushered out of office. And then, of course, his supporters on January 8th, 2023, tried to emulate their comrades in Washington and their attempted coup of January 6, 2021. But like their comrades in Washington, this was squashed. So you are correct to suggest that the scourge of war, if some in Washington have their druthers, would spread southward in this hemisphere. And that does not even take into account the military maneuvers U.S. imperialism is now involved in off the southern coast of China with the Philippines military. It's like a red flag to the bull. It will not end well, particularly since we know that as we speak, Madame Baerbock, the hawkish anti-China foreign minister of the Federal Republic of Germany, is now in Beijing seeking to reverse the import and impact of remarks by President Macron of France, who sought to distance France and the European Union from this new Cold War with China, and of course has come under a very strident criticism as a result. Indeed, if I were to have a word with Mr. Macron, I would ask him to tighten his security, because we know what the United States does, even to allies, if they do not necessarily act in the way prescribed. You may go to your search engine and see what befell the Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro in the 1970s when he was executed unceremoniously because of his attempt to effectuate the historic compromise with the then Italian Communist Party. So once again, Washington, U.S. imperialism, the Pentagon, however way you slice it, it's basically a one-trick pony. It does not understand diplomacy. It feels that it can leverage its military advantage ad infinitum, despite the repeated setbacks in Afghanistan, the catastrophes in places like Libya, and others too numerous to mention.
Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.